folks who are here, and you all don't know each other. John and Sherry know each other. I'd like you to meet my friend and colleague, Deepak Sahasrabudhe, well-known Canadian producer of video products, now very much into video streaming. Sherry is in Olympia, and I suspect that John is somewhere in the region of London, UK.
Hello,
Welcome to you all.
Hi, Deepak.
Hello, John.
I'm
sorry about the sorry about the glitchy connection I've got. I hadn't realized it was glitchy.
Well, at
You
least
mean this isn't a special effect that you're doing that's meant to entertain us?
I wish.
We are supposed to talk about governing, and we do have a topic. Shall we get on with talking about that? The subject being holding accountable those who govern.
Yep.
And when we talk about that, of course, we're talking about governments at all levels, and we know that voters often have a problem feeling like it matters. The first past the post group are criticized because they're often told that their votes are wasted in many elections. And very often voters are discouraged because they feel like they don't have any options at all. And of course, we're also talking about corporations. John, you passed out an article to some of us recently which pointed out something I had never thought about, and that is most shareholders in corporations are minority shareholders. They don't exercise any of the rights of owners. So while they seem to own a piece of the company, are they really owners?
Yes.
And of course, we're talking about non-profit organizations because John, Sherry, and I are all very much interested and trained in the facilitation of policy governance, and we teach that boards are supposed to be accountable to the people they define as their owners. And yet, in many not-for-profit organizations, even membership organizations where the owners are clearly the members and everybody knows who they are, you still have situations where people feel that the board is powerful and the owners are not powerful. So that takes us back to our question for all of this, which is, how do people hold accountable those who govern? John, do you want to talk a little bit about that article? Because I thought that was a fascinating concept, that although shareholders are talked about as if they're owners and can show up at shareholder meetings, in fact, they demonstrate none of the real aspects of what you would call true ownership. So are they owners?
I think essentially what John Kay says in his article, and that maybe we need a new model, and that if ownership as it currently is constituted isn't working, we should stop pretending that it is. So there's suddenly a lot of noise. You've got a lot of background noise.
Yes, you're sometimes a little bit garbled.
Well, I'm always like that, Robert. Yeah. I've got the flu at the moment, so I'm not in the best of states. So yesterday, I was so well yesterday, I gazed at the TV remote control and didn't know what it was and didn't know how to make it work. Which I'm usually very drunk before I get to that stage, and I was as sober as a judge. So today, the day after, and I've found out again how to make the remote control work.
Yay.
But it's a struggle. So if I'm garbled, I'm not surprised.
It sounds better when you come closer to the camera, and I guess your computer and therefore the microphone.
Well, I had to change computers because the camera on my other one is an external camera, and that's why I couldn't bless you with my visage connected earlier.
We're so fortunate to be so blessed.
So, is there such a thing as a real owner of an organization? An identifiable person with a name and a face who can be said to be an owner, one of possibly many owners? And if there is, how is their voice heard? Or is it not heard?
Well, I think that has been one of the reasons there's been such huge scandals associated with the corporate world since the turn of the millennium, and that is that the people who are on the board can take enormous risks, and they're not consulting their owners.
And it's something that I think is complicated because of the global nature of corporations. They transcend borders. They literally can work anywhere in the world. And so it becomes then a difficulty of saying, well, we could say that our owners are our shareholders, but then isn't there also a responsibility as a corporation that's been set up by a government of the people, so to speak, to also be responsible to all of those publics in which they operate and do business? So it becomes more complicated.
So we're going beyond shareholders. We're now talking about stakeholders, the community, and many other people that are affected, clients, suppliers.
Well, and in many for-profit organizations, they would say that the true owners are the people who buy their products, the consumer.
And yet the shareholders would say they are the owners because they're the ones who paid for it. Mm. There are, of course, majority shareholders, and many corporations, certainly small ones, but certainly as well, there are large ones that are family run, and there is some real ownership there. So are we discounting that as a whole group?
Well, in the UK, the protection of, excuse me, I'm just looking for my handkerchief. The protection of small shareholders was supposed to be carried out through independent directors. And that they were there to ensure that all owners' interests were represented, not just a few. Clearly, there's a question about whether that works. I was trying to draw a parallel with the public sector, community groups, political groups, government groups. What is the difference in terms of accountability between them and the electorate, if I can put it that way, particularly those who didn't vote for them, and a corporation where many people may be customers, but very few are actually owners, or owners as we have been defining it up until now. Someone who has skin in the game as a shareholder. So I'm not sure if the distinction between private and public is anything more than just a bit of dressing, really. We do know that the state can regulate the private sector, whereas the private sector's ability to regulate the state may be unclear.
Except at election time.
Even then.
I guess, right.
Yeah.
I've been in an interesting project where we have been where I'm part of a group that is addressing a federal regulatory body, the Canadian Radio Television Commission, the CRTC, which regulates broadcasting, cell phones, all that stuff in Canada. And I'm a proponent for community television. And I've been looking at private enterprise who do not live up to their obligations in providing services in various license areas across Canada. And these would be cable companies that are charging money or permitted to charge money to operate a community cable station in a license area. A license area can consist of part of a municipality or multiple municipalities. And I found in studying 87 of these license areas across Canada, less than 20% complied with the regulations. So I've been before the commission telling them that this is incorrect, and I hope to get some results out of that. I think our CRTC, the Canadian Radio Television Commission, has been captured by the regulated, and policies are interpreted. The policies are written and are very clear, but they're somehow interpreted in favor of the commercial interests, who must offer some benefits to those who make the decisions.
Yes. There are parallels that spring to mind in the UK, Deepak. Some of the banking scams that have come to light over recent years, which have resulted in the banks having to shell out billions of pounds, is an example where on a previous occasion there was a pensions mis-selling scam where, again, banks or insurance companies had to pay up once they were found out. But then the regulator at some point said, we're going to stop claims now. It's gone on long enough. We're not going to allow any more claims, which I find absolutely counter to the reason that a regulator exists. It only benefited the banks. It did not benefit the consumer. And you're talking very much the same thing, as far as I can see. That regulators have the problem. They are seduced by those whom they are supposed to regulate.
We have similar parallels here in the United States. Of course, we all know that because of the global meltdown of the economy. And all of our banks, the ones that were protected by the U.S. citizens that were deemed too big to fail, were bailed out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I recall.
Well, it brings to mind another situation, and that is very often we set up agencies to protect some resource, some aspect of our life. And I'm thinking, for instance, in Canada, the Department of Fisheries or the Ministry of Fisheries. But who do they end up talking to? These regulatory bodies are constantly lobbied, not by us, we the people, but by those people that we want to have controlled. And who do they get close to after a decade has gone by? Who do they hear from all the time? Why are lobbyists so powerful? Because those are the people that our representatives are listening to. You'd think that a person who's been elected to office ought to put a sign on the door, lobbyists are not welcome. And yet, lobbyists are incredibly powerful. How often do you see politicians who decide they don't want to be a politician anymore, and what do? They hire themselves out as a lobbyist. We see that lobbies are incredibly powerful. Anybody who thinks, who looks at the United States from the outside is certainly aware of how powerful the gun lobby is. And it's almost amusing for those of us on the outside to watch the frustration of the President of the United States, who can't change what he wants to change, and yet he's the elected official because the lobby is so powerful. So so some people are holding those we care about to account. The lobbyists seem to be doing a better job than what the Americans call we the people.
I'm just remembering something I read, written by Peter Drucker when I was reading such things a long time ago, and he wrote about regulation that regulators tend to have a churn because they come and sit in their office for a little while and then move on. So inevitably, there are new people in that governance position, and industry doesn't change that often. And so the people that are governed are actually offering advice and how to manage things, helping you along, kind of thing. So gradually, what happens, according to this article I recall from Drucker, the ideas that are held by the commercial interests that are being regulated actually start to be taken on as part of how the policy works, all done in a helpful, friendly kind of way. What do you think about that?
I always found it difficult to argue with Drucker, so I have no quarrel with what he's saying. My experience of regulation in the UK, you cannot regulate something you know nothing about. So the only source of information is the industry you are regulating. The extent to which the regulator is prepared to trust what the regulatees tell him or her is a matter of debate. I think, however, that for a regulator to regulate, they've got to get close to those they are regulating. They also need a means of stepping back and maintaining their independence. And I think that's the biggest difficulty, is how are they held to account? I think they're not held to account, which is why their regulatory role is compromised. How do you hold a regulator to account? Deepak, you were saying you had the opportunity to speak to the Commission.
Yes. I've had a long-term interest in community television, and in the city where I live, the cable company is permitted to add 2% of their gross bill for cable television, for the purpose of funding a community television channel. And if they choose to do that, there are some requirements for what kind of things have to be in the TV programs, or in the community channel. And our cable supplier takes the money, but doesn't give the community channel. What they offer is a regional channel that serves many communities in the lower BC Lower Mainland. I'm in a suburb of Vancouver, and so we don't get, in fact, any programming for our contribution, for our funding. And so this is just wrong, and the regulations don't permit it. And yet this has been going on for 10 years with no enforcement. And so this year I decided to do something about it, and did a study to see what was happening across the country. And with some pretty strong data behind my claim that less than 20% are compliant, the commission actually, I think, heard us.
Good.
Now, a lot of things are happening in Canada. Deepak began doing this work when we had the former very right-wing Harper government, and that has changed during the time this process has been going on. And I think that, Deepak, am I correct? You're seeing a shift in both the ability and attitude of the commission itself in the past few months. So something is happening there. There seems to be they seem to be listening in a way that perhaps they weren't a few months ago.
Absolutely. I think our new prime minister and his ministers are changing the way things are happening in this country. So I'm pretty excited about that from my perspective of community television, because we actually have an upcoming meeting with the Minister of Heritage, who's in charge of this whole area, and to have gotten such a meeting from the Harper government would have been unthinkable. And so it's kind of exciting that we haven't actually got a date to go to this meeting, but I'm told that there's a schedule being tried, that they're trying to put a time down for us.
And I'm familiar with some of the work you've been doing. It has been enormous. Deepak's analysis resulted in a very thorough database of what's going on all across Canada. And what he was doing was essentially making a case which turned the conversation from conversation and he said, she said, to here are the data, here's the evidence, and this is this is what we need to be talking about. Which requires, if you look at it from a user's point of view, an enormous effort. And it's because it is partly your business and partly your passion and partly the support you've had from what amounts, I guess, to a lobby group, which is Cactus.
Yeah. I'm part of a community that's wanting to make this change. And so we together are going forward in this. I don't know that I have much else to say about it, about that whole process, because we're still midway and we haven't got any results yet. We're hoping this spring to see some results.
Isn't one of the issues then, Deepak, going back to what you're quoting of Peter Drucker, that the churn that kind of goes on amongst regulators, and how the churn may be quite useful in some respects in bringing in new faces and new ideas, and a lesser sense of history, and therefore a lesser ownership of the traditions and the customs and mores of the regulated industry. Does that, if that is so, on the assumption it is so, does it apply equally in the political sense? A new person comes along and change can occur. The answer obviously is yes, it does, or at least we hope it does. But the situation that we're talking about is one where Harper is still Prime Minister.
In fact, his commissioners are Harper appointees. So, in fact, Harper continues to be present.
Good. Can he?
Which is not good.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, in the United States, of course, there isn't a lot of churn because the politicians tend to make it a career. And it was never intended to be so. That's why you have two different houses of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives. Some are elected every 2 years and some were 6. The idea of the Senate was so you'd have some stability and continuity, but the others were supposed to churn regularly, and they don't. So, that's why we have a lot of the the stalemate that we have in our current Congress is because you've got people who are well entrenched in their issues, and how do you get through to them other than using lobbyists? And one of our people who's watching out there was asking, how isn't there a way to strengthen the voices of those who aren't part of the class? Like Robert was talking about, the gun lobby, or even AARP, which is the Association for Retired People. There are some very strong lobbying organizations out there, but it seems to me what Deepak is talking about is he's found a way to strengthen voices of others to be heard by collecting enough data and getting enough evidence in front of those folks to be able to make a difference and create some change.
Chuck Bartok has brought up a very interesting thing, and he says our small local newspaper has influenced large corporations and governments to rethink and change. And one of the methods that the public has is to take advantage of the media. But then again, the media tend to have their own focus. We might, one of the things I might do is bail so that Chuck can come and talk as well. But I think holding the media to account is is a very much a side issue. I find that the media is often very shallow in their approach, very short term in their thinking, and when a story isn't particularly control the media, and he's smiling. I think that it's not that we want to control the media, but the media are often not the most responsible people out there either. And I think that maybe control is not the right word. Sorry, Chuck. But maybe it's holding the media to account. The media seem to be, we've given them a very important place in our community, and they have a certain amount of power. Own the media. Chuck, would you, if I bail, would you like to come in? Well, let's see if Chuck, he may not have a camera and a microphone. Chuck, would you like to come and talk jumped here?
There he is. Hi, Chuck.
Good morning. Good morning.
Hi,
Good morning, everybody. A great topic. Happens to be obviously one of my favorites. The mentions I made in the sidebar are reflective of a small newspaper that we started publishing about 4 years in a small town in the Midwestern part of the United States. Since we receive no revenue from anyone else, it's totally a self-funded newspaper, as probably our radio station coming up will be. We have no restriction on who we're going to offend when we report the truth. And so we have taught the community through the newspaper how powerful they are when they attend local meetings, county, city, and even state, and express quite vociferously their positions. We did write an article a couple of years ago about cell towers. I don't know how things, I think most of you are in Canada, maybe not. It comes to find out that most of the cell towers out in the rural areas were non-functional, yet they were still being subsidized by the government due to all of these wonderful things that happen. So we started writing about it, and lo and behold, one of the cellular companies determined that it would be to their best interest to turn those damn towers on and provide better service to the communities. An example of what local can do. And over the last, well, I've only been involved about 60 years in what I call neighborhoods. I've always found out that if we have a power to trickle up, knowing your local government can affect your county government and can affect your state government. And there was a period of time in my life where it actually affected the federal government of the United States of America. So we've focused our energies, my associate and I, into thinking local, We think small. We're very small-minded individuals. But we found out that our impact is quite global. Using social media, of course, is very helpful done correctly. The newspaper does have a social media page. It has 2,000 likes, whatever that means. I guess 2,000 people like the page. Yet 2 weeks ago, an occurrence happened in the community, and 166,000 people were reached and 88,000 people engaged in conversation about that which we reported, with a base of only 2,000 people. So again, I'm not saying that everybody wants to do this or has the bent to do this, but I just wanted to share that I believe, maybe with a Pollyannish attitude, that we as individuals do have the power to do things. You may not agree with our position, but we have found out that our position can get things done to the better of the community, to the benefit of the community. So I just, I'm not saying everybody can go out and do what we did, but we're crazy. Our wives think we're nuts, but they've been doing it 4 or 5 decades. So anyway, I just thought I'd share that. I sit in California. The newspaper gets published every Wednesday. In fact, we have a staff meeting in just a few moments. But I just loved I cruise blab and headlines that, intrigue me. And I just want to share that I believe that we can hold those who govern accountable. I have walked into senators' offices and congressmen's offices in the federal agencies and state agencies. And if you walk in with a correct presence and a certain degree of decorum, but you better have a big stick, and we usually carry a big stick. So I just appreciate that, and it's fun. Things must be different in Canada. I don't know, Sherry, you're in the United States, is that correct?
I am. I'm in Olympia. And it's
Washington.
interesting what you're saying. Yeah, a friend of mine who works for the county of Boulder, or the city of Boulder. She alerted me to a young woman who came to Boulder to talk to people in the city of Boulder that everything begins here, people. If you aren't active in your local government, if you aren't doing what you need to and participating in voting here, coming to meetings, public meetings, if you aren't doing that, then you get what you deserve. And she used some really harsh words, but it got the young people's attention. Right. And when I look at the age of all of us here, we're the typical ones who are active, and I mean, just look at the United States voting. I mean, who turns up to vote? Right. Me, you, Chuck. But getting the younger people engaged in the political process, and as Robert alluded to earlier, making sure that they understand their vote counts. That's part of what you're saying, I think, is that if they don't get involved at that local level first and begin to understand how they can affect change by being involved, they'll never get it at the federal level.
It won't grow. Since we've been around for 4 years, encouraging people to go to city council meetings, planning meetings, I've sat on the other side behind the podium, and let me share this with you, that when you're used to maybe 5 or 6 agitators always at meetings, I mean, the crazies, typically they're gray-haired. But all of a sudden, if you're sitting in a meeting and 8, 9, 10 fresh faces come in, and we encourage our people to always carry a pad of paper and a pencil, and they can sit there and doodle. I don't give a darn what they write down. But I want to share with you that what is said and what is directed from that other side of the room, all of a sudden the tone changes. And now in a small town of 5,000 people, there might be upwards to 200 people at a weekly city council meeting. And believe me, the mark is towed. And the age spread of those people is large. We're finding, just if you look at the Facebook page sometime, the age of the respondents to these posts are not aged or experienced citizens, as we call them. There's a lot of younger people, and younger people are finding out they do have the power. from within to do what they want to do. And we don't all agree. I mean, that's, first of all, what I believe, I believe, and I'm not afraid to state it. What you believe may be different, but we appreciate the opportunity to state our beliefs. And it's amazing how change can be affected. And I appreciate that share about Boulder. There's more and more of this happening, by the way. My wife and I love to travel across country. We drive. We don't go on the interstates. And we visit local businesses and coffee shops. And I always carry a camera with me. And this sentiment is not strange. But it needs to burgeon. It needs to grow. It needs to explode, maybe. So anyway, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Chuck.
I appreciate it, and I'm going to get ready for my conference. Thank you very much.
Great to have you join us. Thank you so much.
Linda seemed to have something to say.
Yeah. Linda, do you want to pop on? We have a seat.
And Linda has written a fair amount over here. Public and political discourse seems to have devolved to monologues, having their time at the mic. Suppose we re-engage dialogue, listening for common interaction versus waiting our turn to say our point of view. I'm sorry Chuck did leave us, because one of the things I would have liked to have explored with him, and one of the refreshing things is his newspaper is him. He owns it. He runs it. He isn't owned by some big corporation. And yet most of the media are owned by big corporations. Horrified when I discovered that Rupert Murdoch had bought National Geographic, which I always thought was a society of members, and essentially it's owned by one of the big media moguls. Well, I would like to have explored with Chuck how important it is that the media really be independent. And do we become suspicious of them when they are owned by powerful interests?
Chuck's just pointed out, Robert, that it's a joint venture.
Aha. So, you're still here, Chuck.
And Linda has pointed out she doesn't have a camera.
Okay.
And Chuck then adds, depends on how much you are willing to say.
Well, that's an interesting point, isn't it? We're now accustomed to being provided with information so easily. With the days when we didn't have Google are almost something I can't remember anymore. I'm accustomed to wanting a fact, and you ask for it, and it's at your fingertips immediately. The idea when we went to school was we were supposed to learn to memorize things. You don't have to memorize things anymore. You reach out and grab them if they are available, and if the people who are supplying it are willing to supply it to you. And maybe we're also losing some control there. This little weekly costs about $6,000 to $7,000. I presume those are American dollars a month with a small staff. Yes, of course.
And Susan Mogerson points out nobody buys newspapers anymore. I find that a bit tricky there. Maybe in a sense an example of the problem we've got, that one person is now saying nobody buys newspapers anymore. Can one person speak for nobody? If we mean everybody fails to buy newspapers, what do we mean?
I do.
I do.
Yeah, I still do.
We do subscribe to newspapers.
Indeed, a small newspaper's just started up in London, not a free sheet. So it'd be interesting to see how it progresses. Bit of a surprise. I don't think anyone thought that would happen, but that's neither here nor there. So is Linda going to join us, or can't you join us without a camera?
I don't think she can without the camera.
Okay.
Linda isn't going to join us, but I just made Susan a co-host so she can jump in if she feels like it. Susan?
I think her answer is no, but thanks.
I got that.
So I want to go back to what Linda was saying about monologues. And, part of the problem is it has become, political discourse has become a series of monologues rather than discourse. It's, here's my position, and then we listen to the other person's positions, sort of. But essentially, the mind is already made up on one side and the other. So there really isn't a discourse in listening. How to make that happen? I mean, how to re-energize the whole idea of what the system of having, if you have two different sides or two political parties or whatever it is, the idea isn't for them to become so firmly entrenched in their positions that they don't listen to the other side. The idea was to ensure that groupthink didn't occur, that there was an open hearing of all of the possible issues on behalf of the citizens or owners or whoever is being represented, and a full listening and discussion and discourse of that. And I don't think there's enough time for that anymore. It seems like there isn't.
Is it a matter of time, Sherry, or is it a matter of people finding themselves in camps where they're talking among themselves? It's not groupthink so much, but it is more ideological thinking rather than trying to deduce the situation from the data that are available.
Depends on the context.
Yes.
In Congress, of course, Robert's Rules of Order were written for such large bodies as our Congress and your Parliament, John. And it was meant to create some order out of chaos with such a large governing body, but to allow for discourse and dialogue and to make sure that all voices were heard. And that Robert's Rules of Order has been used in boardrooms of corporate organizations and also nonprofit organizations as a way to create that. But the issue for me is a board isn't so large that everybody can't be heard anyway. I mean, there should be enough time for all the voices to be heard. And without that, you lose, as we read in the New York Times Magazine, Robert, on Sunday, you lose the collective intelligence of the group.
I agree. And I like nothing nicer than a board full of dissidents. It's more fun. It generally comes up with a wiser decision, says he grandly. And it keeps people on the edge of their seat, rather than wondering when the coffee's going to become available or when we're going to take a break or other critical things like that. So I kind of like the idea of having dissidents, because dissidents feel they have to disagree. They don't disagree with everything all of the time, but they do express disagreement. And a good dissident will argue their case if they are given the opportunity. If you have an unreasonable chairman, like I used to be, I'm not a chairman now, so I can't be unreasonable, can I? Then I would try the glare, I would try bursting into tears, but people would ignore me and still carry on saying what was on their mind. And that was so powerful. And it didn't follow that everyone was going to agree with it. It didn't follow that the board made a decision everyone was really passionate about, but they could live with it. Nobody ever resigned on a matter of principle anyway.
Well, you talked about having an assembly of dissidents, but somehow you as chair or somebody as chair had to pull that together. So eventually those dissidents had to get off their firmly entrenched position, listen to other people, and move. How do you make that happen? Or how do you create an environment where that can happen? And at the end, people feel that maybe they didn't get their way, but at least they were heard, and the result was a beneficial one as a result of all of the input.
Well, I think the chair has a role there in terms of making it safe for people to express dissent. The individuals themselves have to be prepared to take a risk as well. The problem of speaking truth to power raises its head, and the encouragement of the others for someone to speak up, even if you disagree with them, I think is very, very powerful as well. You know, I'm really glad you said that. I don't agree with you, but I'm really glad you said it.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, it's getting rather dated now, but Jim Collins had the iconic book Good to Great. And in it, he said that one of the things throughout the transcripts, one of the things his team of researchers noticed over and over was the transcripts were peppered with words like heated debate, loud discussion.
Yeah.
And Warren Bennis, who was a professor at USC, and somebody who is cited by Drucker and others a lot, Warren Bennis said that a good organization is one that's characterized by people who aren't afraid to tell the truth to the boss.
Yep. Yep.
And I think Linda pointed out something really important. It's a characteristic of a good leader to ask questions without an expectation for a certain answer. Right? I mean, a lot of times, although they don't intend to, managers or leaders of organizations tend to surround themselves with like-minded people. And often the only thing that they get when they ask a question is what they want to hear. I think, John, one of the things that you were saying is it's got to be intentional to surround yourself with people who may not think like you do.
Yep. Yep. I have an abhorrence of groupthink or finding myself in a groupthink situation, and I think most of us are like that. But I can understand situations and circumstances where people feel safer in that kind of setting, and it's this need to feel safe that is maybe something we might explore sometime.
What I'm hearing is, in this business of holding organizations to account, one of the powerful things seems to be that if we're going to hold people to account, we need to act powerfully ourselves. And if I'm correct in listening to what you're saying, John, and what I was listening to Chuck say earlier, is you can exercise that power. He can go and talk to politicians, and they will open their doors to you. It's amazing how often people will listen to you if you ask for their attention. And you can exercise that power in the boardroom, but you can't wish the world was different. You've got to decide that you want it to be different and engage in conversation with a lot of other people. You may not get your way, but you can have an influence. That's kind of what I'm hearing. Does that sound right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's just knowing that you have it, that you can do it. And it's. I think John Carver was the one who said that you know in order to have power, you have to know that you have it. And in that case, he was referring to a board of directors, but he was also talking about the responsibility of knowing that you do have the opportunity to do so. to speak up.
Well, sitting in a bar complaining over a glass of beer about the situation that you don't like isn't going to change anything. So if people...
Hey, wait a minute. In revolutionary America, that worked. All the political meetings were in taverns, for heaven's sake.
Well, maybe they started there, but you have to take it out. You have to take it out of the bar. And a lot of people, I guess, don't feel like anybody's given them the permission to exercise the power that they probably have. And maybe it's this lack of permission. As consultants, one of the things we do all the time for people is just give them permission. We don't have any special magic, but we say, yes, that's what you want. Go forth and make it happen, and they do. I guess we see that all the time.
Don't we really want people to give themselves permission?
That's it, isn't it, John?
Easy to say, but yeah. I'm going to go. I'm sorry, guys. I'm going to go. I keep sniffling and snuffling, and it's driving me crazy. So I'm going to go and get some medicine, and I will see you both next week.
Yes. Thank you, John.
You lose my wonderful visage, but I'm
Get
off.
better.
Cheers. Bye.
Is there anybody else who would like to join us? We've been going for 57 minutes. We're coming up to the top of the hour. And maybe we've covered our material for today. What do you think, Sherry?
Yeah, I think it's time for a wrap.
Well, I'd love to thank everybody who has joined us today. I'm very much stimulated by this conversation. This is our first attempt of the Xylem Group to have one of these conversations, and let's do it again, folks.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
And thanks to everyone who joined. Have a great rest of the week.